And before we get going, Jessica, if you could just quickly give a little background on Liz's bio, then we can turn it over to Liz.
Sure. So Liz began her career by establishing services for college students with disabilities at several universities in the Boston area, where she was active in the disability rights movement. After earning her law degree, she practiced special education law, landlord-tenant law, and family law in Massachusetts, New York, and New Jersey. Liz was recruited as an in-house counsel by a large publishing house that relied on her expertise in the Americans with Disabilities Act. She was responsible for ensuring the company met the legal requirements for accessibility of digital products. When Liz retired from that position and moved to New Mexico, she founded My Little Horse Listener. She's also a volunteer attorney for the New Mexico Center for Immigrant Rights, where she represents unaccompanied children who crossed the southern border. Liz has a master's degree in rehabilitation counseling. She has been certified as an equine facilitated learning specialist by the Australian Institute for Equine Psychotherapy and is licensed to practice law in New York and New Mexico.
All right. Thanks, Jessica. Wow, what a great and diverse background you have there, Liz. Again, thank you for joining us. The title of Liz's talk is My Little Horse Listener, Encouraging Healthy Relationships, One Hoof at a Time. I love that title. So thank you again, Liz, and take it away.
Thank you very much, Craig and Jessica as well. And thank everybody else for joining us tonight and for wanting to learn about what it is that we do. We do a fair amount, the humans do, not the horses, a fair amount of speaking to community groups in the area. But this one in particular has a special significance. I have, like many of you, possibly as well, close family members who have had, struggle with significant mental health issues, and they have benefited both greatly from the mental health care system in this country at this time, and also suffered needlessly, I think, at the hands of the same system. When our family needed support and perspective, we turned to the NAMI group in New York City area. So I view tonight as a way to kind of pay that forward for what NAMI had done for us. Okay, I will try and get my PowerPoint going here. Let's hope for the best. Okay.
Here it comes.
Beginning, I think.
Wow. Good job.
I've done it. All right. Even better. Right. I get rid of all the extra stuff. Okay. So this is my contact information, and I want to give it to you up front because I almost always forget to tell people that you are always welcome to come and visit with us and visit with the horses. It really is the best way to understand what it is that we do. I'll do my best tonight to paint a picture for you. But
where are you
really
located?
We're out in Cerrillos. Okay, so we're kind of near Madrid, about a half hour from the south side of Santa Fe. We used to be closer to Santa Fe. We were in the Tano Road area, but our program just grew too large and the horses just needed more space, so we moved out here. We actually wondered if people would follow us out here because it's so far out, but they do come. If you build it, they will come. Okay, so our agenda here really is going to be a lot of photos because I find photos really help to tell our story. We are a hands-on, experiential type of program. And the pictures really, I think, do a good job. Most people like to look at pictures of little horses. They're really cute. One of the things I also learned in doing this is that a lot of people just don't know what miniature horses are, or they have misperceptions and misperceptions of them. And so hopefully by getting a sense of what they look like when they're in action, that'll help to kind of flesh it out for you. One of my favorite misperceptions is often held by younger children before they come here, and they hear the word miniature and they think they can hold the horses in their hands. So they're a little surprised and a little disappointed sometimes when they find out that they can't. But this fellow here is, his name is Thor. He's the lead horse. And you could see him here with two children, one of whom is a volunteer. And that gives you a sense of their height. This is a short child. And the horse is smaller or not as tall as the child is. We don't have, I mentioned the volunteer here. We rely, probably similar to NEMI, we rely on volunteers. We're very much volunteer based, and we rely on donors to support our services. We have one paid staff, and it's not me. So not having the stress of a payroll to meet really enables us to do what I think is one of our most important missions, and that is to provide all our services for free. We focus on folks that do not have the money to pay for some of the equine services that are available in the Santa Fe area. We never have charged for our services, and we never will. Okay. So what I'd like to start off with explaining this is that, I understand we're not a veterinarian sort of lecture here today about what horses really are about, but I want to share some basic information because there's two characteristics that actually matter quite a lot to us about horses. And I think to talk with you about them helps to understand what we do. And I find it kind of ironic that these two characteristics do not matter at all to the horses. And the first one is their size. Now, you could see from this guy, he's about 350 pounds, right? I mean, you wouldn't want to try and pick him up. But a large size horse is 1,000 to 2,000 pounds for the Budweiser draft horses. But he is a small horse, and we know that. People who look at him know that. He doesn't know that. Nobody in the horse pen thinks that they are small. They're simply horses, and they think and they talk and they walk and respond and they learn and they interact like a horse. And because we rely on the natural behavior of horses to help people, it's really important that they show up as a horse. Okay. We also have, I may have mentioned this before, a donkey and a mule. The two horses came first. That's why the name of our program is My Little Horse Listener. But we do have those two other species. Well, actually, they're all in the equine species, but I find equine such an awkward word to use, so I just call them all horses. Not in front of them, of course, but the donkey and the mule, we're probably a little offended about that. But they have equine kinds of behavior as well, too. The other issue about the size that I just want to mention is that, yes, just mentioned earlier, I was involved for many years with the disability rights movement, with special education law, inclusion, mainstreaming, and all of those important things. And our horses, when they meet large horses, they are absolutely delighted. Again, they think they are the same kind of horse. And so they just intermingle, and there really is, everybody sort of hangs out together. And it puts me in mind of Ellen Sachs, who I was fortunate enough to work with to start a mentoring program a few years ago. And Ellen, for those of you who are familiar with her work, is really big on stigma or on eliminating stigma. And she really stresses the fact that we have more in common in the things that we are alike with than what our differences are. And in some ways, I think these horses are kind of a champion for inclusion because they really show that. The other thing that the horses don't care about, and I use the rather unprofessional word, but our stuff. They don't care about our stuff. They don't care about, what happened in our childhood. They don't care about what a diagnosis that we may or may not have. They don't even care about what we did yesterday. And they're not going to ask questions about that either. And the children in our domestic violence program are particularly appreciative of that. These are kids that are, now everybody knows what was happening in their program. They're tired of being asked about it. They're tired of the stigma that might go along with it. And the horses don't do any of that because the horses only care about the now and what is happening in the immediate present moment. Now, having said that, right, I don't mean to paint them as, alligators or something that are cold and unfeeling. Horses are very sensitive. They're very intuitive. They form very strong bonds with each other. They form strong bonds with the children and the young people who come out to us. They have very rich emotional lives, which I think we can just barely grasp the depth of that. But when we enter the corral, they really have just two things that are on their mind. And the first is, are you a safe person to be around? They can tell that very quickly if you're not. If you come in and if you're angry, you're really, really upset about something, or if you have some kind of old cowboy thing of dominance, that you're going to be like the king and the leader of the horse pen, they're going to sense that right away, and they're probably going to walk away. And the other thing they're interested in is, do you have a carrot in your pocket? Okay, they're always interested in looking for food and finding food. And once they learn that you don't, and we encourage people not to bring anything in their pockets when they come in the horse pen, okay, well, then they're ready to sort of get down to work and get to know you and let you know them. Okay. The other thing that's important about the horse is not caring about what your background is. It's not something that interests them. Is that our work that we do at My Little Horse Listener, we work with everyone. We work with all sorts of populations and people. There are other equine programs that often focus on certain things that may focus on women in transition is a popular one. Veterans or recovering from substance abuse. And we don't narrow ourselves into that we pretty much work with almost anybody who comes to us and thinks that we can help them. We do want, we have a minimum age of 5 years old for children. And while it's not a requirement, it sure helps a lot if you really like animals. And it's kind of a self-selective process that the folks who come to us because they do like animals. And so the horses are used to working with many, many different kinds of people. So having said that, in my mind, my lawyer mind, I still have to organize what we do and explain it to people and so forth. So I do divide things up into programs on the kinds of folks that do come out to us and what their issues might be. Let me just give a little rundown of what these programs are. And you might find that you fit into one or more of them, or you fit into what I call the open door. And that's somebody who we haven't worked with before, but hey, let's give it a shot. Gerard's House would be a good example of that. We haven't worked with grieving children yet, but we are planning to work with them this summer. But basically what we started with the Read to the Horses program, and that was all we did when we first started. I was still working as an in-house counsel at that time, and that was pretty much all the time that I could really give was to a very simple reading program. And so we connected with Reading Quest. It's a tutoring program in the Santa Fe Public Schools, and also with the Santa Fe Public Library. You may have seen us every year. We go to the library, and we have a corral that we set up. This year was by the Plaza. Last year was by their South Side library. It's still a very popular kind of a program. And while the horses really aren't, our horses are very young when we got them, and they're getting older now, so they're a little more settled down. But they weren't, I have to say, I think dogs really trump horses when it comes to Read to the Animals program, because I've seen these golden retrievers that just like lay out in the library, and they're quiet and they're fine for the whole time. And our guys are a little more active. Still a very, very popular program, and we still offer it. Domestic violence recovery is one of our oldest programs. We've worked with Esperanza for going on 5 years now. And Esperanza sends out families, mothers with children, and we work with the mothers and we work with the children. We have a program called Bowie's Place. Bowie was a child who was recovering, or actually he was under treatment for leukemia. When we first met him, he was about 5 years old, and he fell in love with one of the horses. And so we were just so moved by Bowie and his story that we decided to just name a whole program after him. And this is a program for children with cancer, or children who are in remission or recovery from cancer, and their families as well. And it is also for families who have lost a child to cancer. Our newest program, which is turned out to be by far our most popular program, it was one of those things where I came up with the idea, and either it was going to work really well or it was just going to fizzle out. And it really has been a hot program. It's called My Mini Mentor, and it's for girls ages 12 to 18 who could use some confidence, who may have had it back when they were younger, but as they approach adolescence and all the challenges that face adolescents now, which are so much more difficult, I think, certainly than what I had to face way back in the day. And so these girls come out, and it's an 8-week program, and they often come out with a friend, because it gives them a little more courage. And the program's going super, super well. Then the open door I mentioned before, and that's for, for none of the above. Okay. And then we do community outreach. We'll often go out either to schools or to programs. And those are often horse education kinds of things. I mean, there isn't a whole lot of the type of learning that we do within our program with I call it a one and done, kind of a thing, but it introduces people to the horses, into what we do. It often, generates more interest and more people, coming out to work with us. And it gives us a chance to share our philosophy on horses and horse training and, how to treat horses, which tends to be at odds with the way things have historically been done anyway with the Southwest. Okay, equine facilitated learning. It doesn't exactly roll off, your tongue when you say that. And it's, in terms of explaining it, I think the best way to explain it would be what I have here. And that's, we use the natural behavior of horses, right? We rely on that. We want the horse to be a horse. Okay. And they're not always perfect. Okay. People wonder if our horses do tricks or if they're really specially trained and so forth. And, they're trained to be nice horses, and to have manners. But pretty much we want them to show up as they are, because it's in that natural state where we feel they can really be most helpful. And then what I call our secret sauce to it, what I really emphasize is bonding. That when I can have a young person and an equine bond with each other, anything can happen, and it really can be wonderful. If we can't get that bond going, then the person will most likely drop out, because it's the bond, it's the attractions of the horse that really keeps them coming. And you can almost see the bond here between this child, and this is our donkey, our miniature donkey, Serafina. It's like, Serafina can't get close enough to this child. Okay. So what are these wonderful things that the horses can teach? Well, this is Melly. She's our miniature mule. And I will just point out that horses, similar to us, are kind of on their journey to wisdom. Melly is young. She's the youngest one in the corral, and she is acquiring wisdom at her own glacial speed. She's taught by the other horses. That's just how they operate in a herd, that the older ones teach the younger ones how to behave. Okay, so there are many ways. There are books and many articles that have been written about ways that horses can model positive behavior for humans. And in fact, that's how the idea for the mini mentor program, using the horses as mentors for the girls. But, a lot of what we see is compassion. Horses really have empathy for us, empathy for each other. And when you're lucky enough to see that in action, it really is a very beautiful thing. They're good team players. They live as part of a herd. It's how they stay alive. They protect each other. For the most part, they're good decision makers. The mule and the donkey, a little more than the horses. The horses tend to react as opposed to respond. And the mule and the donkey are a bit more thoughtful, but they usually come to the right conclusion at the end. They communicate very clearly with each other without making a sound. Okay. And they set boundaries that are very, very clear. You learn early on what's okay with them and what is not okay with them. Our two horses started out as show horses, not with us, but with their previous owner. And they just decided they didn't want to do that anymore. And when a horse decides they don't want to do something, it's not going to happen. So that sense of boundaries and what's permissible with them and what's not is something that I think particularly children that have lived in environments where boundaries have been very loose can benefit from that. Now, for I guess kind of limited time purposes here now, I've chosen what I think are the 4 areas that are very predominant in the work that we do. with the children and the adolescents that come out to us. And that is the awareness, particularly with social media now. I find that kids are just checked out. To really have them focus in on the present and what's going on is really an important thing. Playing well with others. We've had many children, particularly from our domestic violence program, that just don't have the skills, haven't learned the skills to really get along with others. The compassion, if children haven't been treated with compassion, they're generally not going to show it. So we work on that. And then trust would fall within that category as well, too. Yeah, but the awareness, we do this with everybody who comes into the horse pen. And we want people to sort of calm their mind before entering it. Because, well, first of all, if you do go in and you're still upset, it's going to upset the horses and they're going to walk away. But, we are a learning program. And so we want people to be kind of in a position where they can learn. And we find even the youngest children can get onto that. We have a very young child. I think she was about 6 years old, and she is calming her mind after she's entered the horse pen, and the mule seems perfectly fine with that. So awareness is a really big thing for us, that they just, kids need to be where the horses are, right? And oftentimes they're not, their head has checked out. They're kind of used to checking out, not wanting to be present in the environment they have. So we really work on that. And of course, horses are always present. So that's a really good thing that they model. Okay, the playing well with others. Miniature horses like to play. I may have mentioned that before, but they like to play games. They like to play soccer. They like to jump over things. They like obstacle courses. We really try and keep their mind stimulated. And so the way that we used that, and I'll give you one example of it, is we had two little brothers. I guess they were about 5 and 7 at the time. And they just did not get along with each other at all. They were just constantly fighting with each other. The mother was kind of at her wit's end with it. The therapist, she knew what was going on, but it was hard for her to intervene with it. So what we did is we set up a task for them to build a playground for the horses. And I don't mean a fancy type of playground. I mean something just with boxes and something to jump over. For example, here, Thor, the white horse, likes to jump. And they had to work together to do it. And for a whole hour, they built this horse pen. And for the most part, they just got along really well with it. And I think it was because they were too young to really articulate this, but they loved the horses. They had bonded. They had made that connection I was talking about before. And so they were able to, that connection with the horse was more important to them, and making their horses happy was more important to them than arguing with each other. So at least for that hour, they were able to have the experience of what it's like to get along and what you can do when you actually get along. Compassion. This was a tough one. Boy in the ditch. This is neither the boy, this is actually Meg, and it's not the ditch, this is Thor. Thor is now a white horse, and he started out almost like grayish black. Every year he gets lighter and lighter, but it is the same horse that you saw initially. And this was an adolescent boy whose mother reported that he just seemed to have no sensitivity for the feelings of anybody else in the family, in school, as teachers, that he just was very insensitive. Lack of compassion, I guess, would be a way to call it. And that's not a good thing for a child to have. We want children to have to grow up with that sense of compassion. And so what we did here, and this is one of the reasons why I love, of all the stuff I've done in my career, that I find this the most interesting and stimulating for me, because it's very creative. I come up with all sorts of experiences that I think will fit the need. And sometimes they work really well, and sometimes they don't. And when they don't, I have other experiences that I'll pull out. So I pulled one out of my head for this child, and it ended up working. He was bonded with Thor. Okay, again, that bond that I talked about before. And so what we had him do was work with Thor, who had this fear about stepping over like a ditch, which made it hard when you're walking. We walk the horses a lot. They're too small to ride. So they walk for exercise. And so he would come to these ditches and he would just hesitate. So I explained that to this boy. And I said, I really would like for you to find out, what's going on in Thor's head. Why do you think he doesn't, want to go over the ditch? And maybe you could help him do that. And he did. He spent at least a couple of weeks with Thor, talking with him, what he was saying, but I could see that they were talking and he was being very patient. And sure enough, Thor started walking over those ditches. So, and then the mother reported that he seemed to be kinder at home. So what we were able to provide for him was that experience of compassion, and what can happen when you try and get inside or figure out how somebody else is feeling and thinking. In this case, that somebody else was a miniature horse. The girl and the donkey. This is actually, I may actually skip this one, or I could talk about it later if we have time, but I know Jessica said that I have a half hour and I don't want to wear out my welcome here. So we'll come back to that later, but I will talk about trust because that's a huge one for a lot of the children that come here, that trust has been something that they don't even know what it means. They're not sure what the word is. Or they just haven't experienced it in their life. And so what we do with trust with kids is that we often work backwards. Okay, we start with, well, how can we have the horse trust you? What do you think you need to do and act and behave with the horse for the horse to trust you? So that's how we introduce concepts of consistency, concepts of kindness, constance, of doing what you say that you're going to do, showing up when you say you're going to show up. I mean, some of the very basic kinds of things. And then the horse will inevitably start to trust the child. And you could see that happening, and the child knows that it's happening. And it's a really beautiful thing when the horse trusts the child. And then we work backwards for the child to trust the horse as well. So ideally, we would be able to do this with like human beings. I don't have access to the human beings for that. I just have access to the horses. And so that's how we try and address that real barrier that we find a lot of children are facing. Okay, the $1 million question. Does this really work? Is there a long-term impact on anything having to do with horses helping people? And that would include equine facilitated learning, what I do. It would include equine psychotherapy. It would include a hybrid, which is also what we do because we sometimes have therapists come out. I think I mentioned that before, with the children. Are these just transactional moments, that are nice moments, but they don't last? Are the two brothers that I mentioned before, are they getting along now? Will it have an impact on their later life? We just don't know. We don't have the research yet on that, on the long-term impact of this kind of work. We have some short-term research on individual programs, and it's usually the people who are on the staff of the programs have conducted the research on it. And of course, the outcomes are always positive. Everybody's improved and increased, in everything. And so I'm not arguing with that, but I'm just saying, how long does it really last? And we just need some really good research, I think, on that. Speaking about myself and what we see, I mean, it's really qualitative feedback. And most I can share is what happens in my own program. And the two themes that arise that we like to ask children, when they're at a session, then when they come back the next week, and then we say, okay, what did you think about during the week with the horse? And, ask them again about what did you think about the session last time? And what we often hear is that I felt so happy and relaxed when I was with the horse. And I felt happy just thinking about the horse, when I wasn't there. To me, that's meaningful. We have a video on our website. It's a young girl named Izzy who I think had some school anxieties and some school stresses. And she talks at the very end of the video, and she talks about how peaceful it is just to see a horse living their life, without worrying about anything. And they don't worry about anything. I mean, there's that alertness because they're prey animals. If something that's out there, but that's not until it actually is something that they hear and say. And the other interesting data that I have with this, and I don't even know if you'd even call it data, but it's just our donors. Okay, we're fortunate to have some wonderful donors that enable us to keep doing this. And what I sometimes hear from them is, I had a horse when I was a child, and it was the best thing in my life. And we have one woman who's near 80 years old. She had a horse back when she was 5 or 6. And that horse is still something in her experiences with it that she remembers what her experiences were like with that horse. So that's why we really keep on doing what we're doing, putting horses into people's lives. And I just want to share with you one way that we want to put horses into even more people's lives. And that's would be really our next step. And that's increasing our community intervention program. We often get requests to come into the community. We work with a lot of nonprofits, and a lot of them would rather have us come out to them than them come out to see us. And we do what we can with it, but we really, we need to improve staff to do that. We need a safer horse trailer to take them and so forth. So that's our hope. Anyway, we're calling it Hauling Hope. That we can really increase our access, because for every person that can make it out here, there's probably 15 that can't. Cerritos has public transportation, by the way, something a lot of people don't know. You can grab a free bus. Well, you have to grab it, but you have to make a reservation ahead of time. And it takes you from the mall in Santa Fe, out to where we are here. So that could be helpful, for some people. But I think actually bringing these horses into the community would be just really, really great. It's something that you can't do that much with big horses. Big horses aren't quite as easily portable, but our guys are. Okay, that's what I have. I hope I've given you a clearer picture of what it is that we do. And at this point, I'm happy to answer questions. I know of at least one that's coming. I can't see your hands raised, so I'm afraid you'll just have to sort of shout out.
Thanks, Liz. That was great and fascinating. And for our participants, if you have a question or a comment, either put it in the chat or feel free to raise your little yellow hand on your system and ask it verbally. I do have a few questions, but again, if you have a question or a comment or what have you, either put it in the chat or raise your real hand or your virtual hand, and we can call on you. Liz, I was just curious, how do people find you? How do you get your clients, the youth? How does that work?
Yeah, well, it started with my making an affirmative outreach to several of the nonprofit organizations. This was back in 2019 when we were moving from the reading program into doing something else. And so that was our first way of kind of getting known. And then we had I almost call it a blessed event. For us, and I think perhaps for NAMI as well, publicity is really important, and communications. If people don't know about you, then you're like the tree falling in the forest. But we had the press became interested. The Santa Fe New Mexican became interested in what we were doing, so they sent a reporter out to cover one of our stories. And so that gave us some press coverage that helped. But then we had the New Mexico School for the Deaf came out with their students who were going to sign their books to the horses. And so both the Albuquerque Journal and the New Mexican came out for that. And they wrote a story, and then the story got picked up by the Associated Press. So it was all over the country. So that was how we got kind of more known, sort of put more on the map. But still, I mean, here in Santa Fe, it's really mostly through word of mouth. I mean, of course, we have a website, we have a Facebook page, we're on Instagram. It was interesting. Just earlier today, I got a call from a judge who I guess reads your newsletter, perhaps. And so she had read about that I was going to be talking about this program, and she wanted to find out more about it, particularly because a lot of, on her caseload, everybody's indigent. They're pro se, they're representing themselves. And she's tried referring them to equine therapy, but it's just too costly. People just don't have the money for that. And we don't charge. So I tried to explain to her, what we did. And she said she would try and make the session tonight. So if she's here, maybe she can pop in.
Tonight, and she's here.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, that's great. Okay, so that's an example of how it's almost serendipitous sometimes, how it is that people find out about us.
Great. Thank you. Looks like Jessica has a question.
Yes. Liz, and when you and I started talking, you mentioned you really wanted to open your doors to those who are struggling with mental illness. And I know you don't have a set program for doing that, but if someone wanted to connect with you, can you maybe describe, how they would go about doing that and what that might look like?
Sure. Well, first that they would give me a call or an email, and we would set up a time for them to come out for an introductory visit. So they would get a sense of me, a sense of the horses, a sense of the kind of work that we do. And again, I'm really big on autonomy and people making their own decisions about what feels right for them. And that's what I would want to have happen during that first session, that they could either be, curious, so, hey, I'll give it a try. Or they might just say, this isn't for me. But in terms of what we would do, it would be very similar to the kinds of things we talked about before. I would have to have some kind of sense of what it is they might like, what to work on, what you feel is not working in your life, and then develop we call them experiences with the horses that would, reinforce some of the positive skills that they might need to have. We are open 7 days a week. We live with the horses, which is why we know them so well. And from 8 in the morning until 7 at night, we're open. So our flexibility, we find, makes it easy, particularly for working people.
Excellent. Thank you.
Sure.
Liz, I have another question. Is there such a thing as a national organization that is around equine facilitated learning? I mean, if somebody wanted to do a little research and get a better feel for what that is all about, is there a website or something you would recommend that gives them a kind of a feeling about the ins and outs of equine facilitated learning?
Sure. There are, as the field grows, organizations are popping up, and in part and becoming very competitive. And they're selling credentials. Okay, so if you pay a few $1,000s and you go through some kind of program or course that they have, then you get your credential. They're the two that are predominant in the United States. One is called PATH. They keep changing their acronym, but it's basically Professional Association of Therapeutic Healing or something like that. The other is called EGALA, EHEALA. The program that I was trained in, and that I would highly recommend, is the Australian Institute for Equine Psychotherapy. It is in Australia. I have family there, so I have connections with that country. But yeah, so I took their course for a whole year, and it really was a high quality course. But just going to their website, I think one can learn the kinds of things that I think you're asking about.
Yeah, great. Say that again, the Australian Association?
It's the Australian Institute for Equine Psychotherapy. It's kind of a misnomer because it makes it sound like the horses, are the ones that are undergoing psychotherapy. But it trains, and they're very careful about dividing equine assisted learning from equine therapy, the conversation that you and I started to have earlier.
Right. Well, as they say in Australia, good on you.
I know. No, I love it.
And what did Rick write there, Jessica, in the chat?
There's a comment from Rick V. Hill. Thank you, Liz, for your presentation. I would like to invite you to LC18 to provide a presentation to my community in the Pueblo of Tezuque, from Rick V. Hill.
Okay. So, Rick, we would love to come. Thank you for that invite. Just contact me, by phone or by email, and we can set something up.
Anybody have any other questions or comments? I have another question, Liz, and pardon me if I got this wrong, but your program assists children and youth and not adults. Is that correct?
I've not had an adult approach me yet. And I am most accustomed and mostly trained for working with children and adolescents. But I have a partner, a woman who works with me who's very experienced in working with adults. So if an adult called and showed up,
Okay.
we'd work with them.
Okay.
That's what I'm wondering. Sorry to jump in. Yeah, I'm just wondering for the people who are struggling maybe with depression, is that something that I think if they could come and just interact, is that an option, or is that something you think you guys could work with?
There's an old expression about something being everything is okay as long as it doesn't scare the horses. And that's kind of what we go by here too, that, we're really open to so very much. I mean, I'm very fortunate, I had a very good legal career. I've retired from that. I now have time to devote to things that are really meaningful to me, beyond copyright law. So I would just encourage anybody, give us a call, come out. We schedule pretty carefully. I don't overschedule the horses because they let me know they will actually just walk away if they're tired or they just, woke up on the wrong side of the bed that morning and just like us, and they just don't feel like working. So we try and pace them pretty carefully, but yeah, definitely, don't assume that it's not for you. I remember this conversation I had. It was on a chairlift of all things at Ski Santa Fe. And the guy who was on the chairlift with me, was, what do you do? What do you do? And so I guess he thought he was asking, a really insightful question. And he said, well, who do you think, can benefit from what it is that you do? So I thought about it and I said, I can't think of anybody who can't benefit, from what we do. So that's probably the thought that I'd like to leave people with.
Yeah, thank you. Looks like Sylvia, you have a question, Sylvia, or a comment?
Yes, thank you. Liz, thank you for answering the phone when I called you over a lunch hour and for all of this information. I just want to say it just seems invaluable to our families and, of course, to the work I do at the courthouse with so many families. So I'm sure I will be reaching out to you and hopefully visiting you soon. I think that would be awesome. And again, thank you for what you do. I want to say I've been a judge now for 11 or 12 years, and I'm still finding out about programs that I never knew existed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really awesome, like yours.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Having been a family law lawyer myself in Boston all those years ago, I know how difficult it is, for kids and families. And I also share that, maybe that challenge that you've experienced of just sort of finding out the programs that exist. It's like peeling an onion, the things just keep popping up. Like if you were to ask me, so please don't, because I don't know the answer, but what are all the other equine programs that are like mine that are in the area? And I have to say, I don't really know. We don't have a really good network. We don't really connect with each other. I know of a few, but I'm sure there are more. So yeah, I'm glad that you were browsing through the newsletter and,
Right.
came across me that way.
Yep. Thanks.
Sure.
Anybody else have a question? I have a silly question, Liz, that reveals my ignorance around horses, and it's not related to the facilitated learning aspect of what you do, but are miniature horses genetically different than full-size horses, or are they basically the same, but they've been selectively bred to be smaller and smaller over a series of generations?
It's the latter. Yeah, they have been. It started maybe about 150 years ago in Europe, where they were breeding for royalty. They wanted small horses for their children to play with. And so I guess over time, you keep making horses smaller and smaller and smaller. My herd is on the, I always laugh at that expression, my herd, but my herd They're on the tall side of the miniature horse world.
Hmm.
You know, they weigh between 200 as the smallest, 200 pounds up to about 350. But there are really, really small horses. We call them dwarfs, which may not be a polite word these days, but they weigh less than 100 pounds. Those are horses that can go on airplanes and that are trained to be guide horses. And yeah,
Wow.
I live for the day to see a miniature horse on an airplane. I put up with a lot from the airlines if I could see a miniature horse on there. But those horses they have lots of health problems, you know, as well. They're just really overbred and just really too small. And my guys are small, but they're robust.
Mm-hmm. And do you have a breeding program too? I mean, are you breeding these horses you're on your own, or do they come in from elsewhere? Or
No, they don't. God forbid. No, I should have a breeding program. My husband would divorce me. No, the two horses we bought, they were the show horses. We bought them from Albuquerque. The donkey was a bit of a rescue horse, which I think is maybe why she has so much sensitivity, you know, for children. And then the mule was actually a mistake. The mule was supposed to be a donkey. But long story short, it turns out that she's a mule, and we had gotten her from a farm in North Carolina. There is somebody that breeds miniature donkeys in Lamy, and I have my eye on a new donkey that is yet to be born. But I have to convince my husband that it's in all our best interest to add a fifth animal, you know, to our, but donkeys are so perfect for this kind of work. I mean, they're just absolutely precious. So, yeah, no, it's not a silly question at all.
Interesting. Thank you. Raquel, looks like Raquel has a question or a comment.
Yes, I have a question. Based on your experience when the kids work with the horses, is it short term? Is it on a case by case? When are they ready to move out of the program? Or is there a specific time limit? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We have for my mini mentor program, it's an 8-week program. It's an 8-week commitment. For the in the Esperanza program, it's at least a minimum of 6 weeks. What I try and stay away from are what I call the one and dones. Okay, because that's almost like just a petting zoo when that happens. So I think to really get a lot out of this program, it has to be at least 6 weeks. It has to be at least 6 sessions. I've had some people or some children that have come for as long as 6 months. So I kind of let them determine what it is that, you know, but they still, or their parents, what they feel that they're still getting out of it. I know it's an incredible hassle for some people to come out here. So sometimes that's part of it. But with the My Mini Mentor, it is a very specific curriculum that we cover from week to week. And so that's why and it all kind of blends together. So that's why we do have that minimum that's on it. But we really try and be flexible. And, you know, the other thing too is that it's hard for the horses do connect, you know, with the children that come here. And so if somebody comes for just like 3 or 4 times and then they don't come anymore, you know, the horse is kind of looking for them. I have to put up with the donkey braying, you know, wondering where they are. So we want to be fair. I mean, the horse's well-being is always in my mind as well, too. And we don't want them to see children as, oh, they just come and go, because then the horses will just not really interact. They won't put in the energy for interacting with them. So we really stress the bonding. And I hope that answers your question. It's both, there's a flexibility to it, but there's also an intention on my part to make this go for as long as it's beneficial for the child and for the horse.
Great, thank you. As far as the resources you have, volunteer and otherwise, do you have the ability right now to take more people, or are you full and do you have a waiting list, or where are you with respect to that?
Right. With the My Mini Mentor, I'm pretty full with that. You know, I don't want to stress the resource with it. With the others, you know, because we do have a cadre of volunteers, some of whom are very well trained at this point in supporting us and doing this. And because we're here 7 days a week, you know, and our hours can be so long, that at this point, I don't have a waiting list that if somebody called me tomorrow, you know, we could set up something for probably 2 weeks from now, starting.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you.
All right. Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead, please.
No, I was ready. I thought we were ready to leave, so I was going to thank everybody and say goodbye.
Yeah.
But it sounds like, Craig, you have something else you wanted to
No,
add.
I was just about ready to do the same thing. So your timing's perfect.
Okay.
Just on behalf of NAMI Santa Fe, thank you so much for both presenting to us tonight, but also for the work you do, the critical work you do with your program.